Hao is a level 3 bum at the bottom of his class, and because he is so weak, he is constantly picked on by the rest of his classmates, who are around levels 4 and 5. Apparently, when Hao first joined the academy, he was hailed as a prodigy by the entire school, but even after 2 years there, he hasn't managed to level up significantly at all, which is why he is losing so badly to these guys. However, before he could really get his ass beat, his sister, Yunfei, came to his rescue, kicking one of the bullies right into a wall. Unlike Hao, Yunfei is the true definition of a prodigy, having reached level 7 in only 1 year when most students would take at least 4 years to do the same. The other bullies are absolutely terrified of her, so they grab their friend and run off as quickly as possible. You would think Hao would be jealous of his sister for succeeding where he failed, but no, they actually have a great sibling relationship, no Alabama. Back when they were little, their mom was dropping them off at school one day when, all of a sudden, a rift opened in the sky and a terrifying monster tore its way into their reality. Their mother immediately grabbed them and ran for cover, but the monster had already begun tearing through all the people nearby, and unless something was done quickly, it would only be a matter of time before it found them. Thus, their mother made the tough decision to leave her kids behind and head out to face the creature. She possessed incredible power, and for a while, she put up a good fight against it. But ultimately, she knew she wouldn't be strong enough to take it down. To make matters worse, the monster was clearly after the divine seal that was entrusted to her, and if it were to get its hands on it, the consequences would be catastrophic. So she needed to do everything in her power to stop it. The monster mocked her and told her to just give up already because there was no way she could win, but while that may have been true, it underestimated just how far she was willing to go to stop it. This was a hard decision for her, because she knew she would be leaving her children behind forever, but she had no choice. So she looked over at Hao and told him to protect his sister for her before flying into the air and detonating the treasure to stop the monster from getting it. In the years following the attack, more and more monsters began to cross over into the human dimension to wreak havoc, but at the same time, humans began to awaken supernatural powers to fight back against them. And to help young fighters develop their powers, the Academy was created. Back in the present, Hao is celebrating his 18th birthday with his father and sister. They tell him to make a wish and blow out the candles, and normally, Hao would have wished to not be a weakling, but if something like making wishes actually worked, then he would have gotten stronger years ago. Hao ends up making a wish, but whatever he wished for definitely wasn't granted because, a moment later, a spider monster tears its way into this dimension and immediately begins wreaking havoc on the surrounding area. In order to protect his family, Hao's father, who's level 9 by the way, jumps in to try and stop the monster so he can buy his kids enough time to escape, but he immediately gets bodied. Seeing this, Yunfei tries to attack as well, but if her father couldn't do anything to stop it, then her level 7 ass doesn't stand a chance, and sure enough, her arrow does absolutely nothing to the monster. The spider then zaps Yunfei and is about to cut her down, but just before it can deliver a finishing blow, Hao jumps in front of her and grabs its leg. Yunfei tells Hao to get out of the way because he isn't strong enough to handle that thing, and Hao is well aware of that, but he's not about to sit there and watch his family be slaughtered. He tells them to run away while they still have the chance, but unfortunately, while it's brave of him to risk his life for his family, in terms of strength, he's still a bum. So the spider easily stabs him through the heart and prepares to do the same to the others. Hao tries to grab the spider's leg to slow it down, even if only a little, but the spider casually tosses him aside because it doesn't want to waste any more time playing with a worthless level 3 nobody. As Hao's body hits the ground, he is filled with heartache since he can't believe he is really going to die like this, even though he still has so many things he wants to do. However, just as he's about to die, Hao awakens the King of Glory system, and all of a sudden, an unbelievable amount of power surges into his body. He has no idea how this happened, but he uses his new power to start pushing the spider back, and this time, he is actually holding his ground, so the spider realizes that it severely underestimated him. It finally starts taking the battle seriously, so it opens its demonic eyes and begins absorbing energy from the surrounding humans. Monsters like the spider are able to level up in battle by sucking energy from their victims, and it uses that energy to blast Hao, which knocks him out completely. The spider is about to finish him off, but the system detects that Hao's HP is below 1%, so it grants him permission to use an ultimate skill, and once the skill is activated, Hao proceeds to burn the spider to ash with his tremendous firepower, but he collapses moments later. Hao later wakes up in a strange space, and he hears a voice telling him that the divine system has finally been activated and the Crimson Emperor attribute list, one of many contained within the system, has successfully been linked, and the system informs him that his current link level is 12. He is relieved that all his years of training haven't been a complete waste of time, but when he tries to check his new level, he is disappointed to find out that he is still only level 3. The system informs him that his link level is publicly visible, but there's no need for him to worry because his strength will still be that of a level 12. And Hao is glad to hear that, because it means that from now on, he can finally take charge of his life. Back in the real world, Yunfei has taken both Hao and her father to the hospital for treatment, but her father's condition is significantly worse, and if he doesn't receive treatment soon, he is going to die. Unfortunately, the doctor refuses to treat Hao's family because he thinks they are a bunch of brokies who won't be able to pay their bills, so he doesn't think it would be worth it to treat them. Yunfei begs him to reconsider, but the doctor shoves her away and tells her to get out of the hospital. Hao comes out and catches Yunfei just in time to keep her from getting hurt, and seeing him, Yunfei asks Hao if he's alright since she's still worried about his well-being, but he's perfectly fine, so he tells her he will handle this. The doctor is rather shocked to see Hao back on his feet so soon, since he doesn't recall providing him with any treatment, but Hao tells him he will handle everything. He approaches the doctor, pulls out the magic gem he got from the spider monster, and says he will pay for his father's medical expenses. The doctor is in disbelief because he realizes that the gem is extremely valuable, but he can't believe that a level 3 bum like Hao would be able to acquire it on his own. However, he's not one to turn down a payday, so he decides to take the gem after all. But as the doctor grabs it, his hand is suddenly engulfed in flames. This was Hao's way of getting back at him for what he did to Yunfei a moment ago, but he plays it off and says the gem's power is still fresh, so touching it recklessly is probably what caused the fire. The doctor is embarrassed and yells at his subordinates to get back to work, and then tells Hao that the gem is only worth around 200,000 yuan, while his father's treatment will cost 500,000, so he still needs more money. Hao promises that he will get the rest if the doctor gives him some time, and since he already has a down payment, the doctor agrees to give him 1 day to make the full payment, but if he's any later than that, his father will be kicked out. Once the doctor is gone, Yunfei asks Hao if he has a plan because earning 500,000 in 1 day is practically impossible, but fortunately, Hao has already thought this through. He says there's a competition being held at the academy tomorrow, and the prize money is quite large, so if he wins, they will be able to pay off their dad's medical costs with no problem. Yunfei is excited to hear that and says she wants to enter as well, but Hao reminds her that her injuries still haven't healed yet, so she should rest and leave this to him. If Hao says he can handle it, then Yunfei has full faith in him. But around the corner, the doctor makes a call to his boss, warning him to change the plan because a suspiciously powerful individual has just appeared. The next morning, at the academy, the competition is about to begin, and thanks to a generous last-minute sponsorship from the Hanmo Group, the prize pool has been increased to 1 million. As a special guest, the elder daughter of the Hanmo Group, Moker, is there to watch the competition. She even states that the group will be happy to welcome any outstanding talents who perform well, and all the students become excited after hearing that because joining the Hanmo Group is one of the greatest honors out there. However, when the stage of the competition is announced, their tune quickly changes because the arena will be a shadow forest where the level of enemies ranges from level 5 all the way up to level 15. The boss of this dimension is a level 15 Shadow Tran, and points can be earned by defeating monsters, but also by taking out fellow classmates, which basically means they are incentivized to kill each other. The students start to complain because the rules seem unnecessarily cruel, and that may be true. But Moker's response is that she doesn't care. And she's not just saying that for dramatic effect either. She genuinely doesn't care if they survive out there or not, because the only thing that matters in this world is strength. So if you're not strong enough to survive, then you're worthless to her. Most students are hesitant to step through the portal to participate, but Hao doesn't hesitate for even a second and steps right through. The bullies who usually pick on Hao see him walking fearlessly, and they don't want to seem like wimps, so they follow him in, and after them, several other students work up the courage to go in as well. Meanwhile, Moker takes a look at Hao's stat sheet, and she seems interested in him because she heard that he was the one who defeated the demon spider yesterday. In the Shadow Forest, Hao spends a few minutes killing basic spiders, but the little ones aren't earning him much experience, so he decides to go looking for more powerful monsters. To do that, he starts following a group of spiders, hoping that they will eventually lead him back to their nest. But along the way, he hears the sound of a girl calling out for help. He follows the sound and eventually finds one of his classmates trapped in a spider web. She is extremely relieved to see Hao and begs him to save her. Most of the other students came in groups, so worried that this might be a trap. Hao asks her what happened to her team, and she responds that her teammates ditched her after she got caught, so she really needs his help or she's going to die. Hao feels bad for her, so he agrees to help. but he tells her to quiet down because they wouldn't want to attract any monsters. He then begins burning the webs to set her free, but once the webs are gone, she starts falling to the ground. Hao runs to catch her, but he gets caught in a second spider web, which scoops him up and ends up sandwiching his face in the girl's thighs. This was all part of the spider's plan because it knew that if it left the girl alive in one of its traps, then someone would eventually come to save her, so it would get 2 humans for the price of 1. However, Hao doesn't plan on becoming spider food anytime soon, so he burns the webs to free himself. But he and Ruan are still stuck together, so he needs to do something about that. The spider begins firing dozens of poison attacks, and each one would be deadly on contact. But fortunately, before it could hit Hao, Ruan manages to bite through the webs, and once Hao's arms are free, he is easily able to fend off the monster. Ruan is surprised because she had no idea that Hao was this strong. Since Hao has mastered the Crimson Storm ability, he knows this spider is no match for him. But its poison is still pretty deadly, so as it shoots at him, he jumps out of the way to avoid being hit. The spider continues firing at him, but Hao is 10 times as fast and strong as he used to be, so he is easily able to cut through the attacks until he gets close enough to land a finishing blow. Once the spider is dead, Hao walks up to it and picks up one of its fangs, at which point the system upgrades it into a deadly poison item that can be used 3 times. Hao had no idea the system could do that, but he's not going to turn down a powerful item, so he puts it in his storage. Just then, the competition broadcast announces that Hao has defeated a demon spider, so he has been awarded 1,000 points for his effort, and since Ruan helped, she is counted as part of Hao's team and receives 500 points. Ruan can't believe she was able to earn points by mooching off Hao's hard work even though she didn't do much. But if Hao were to leave her, she would definitely be killed by the next monster she encounters. So now that the battle is over, Ruan begins praising Hao in hopes of getting him to like her enough to keep her around. However, Hao won't fall for such flattery, though he could use a healer like her, so he's fine with letting Ruan tag along. Meanwhile, Ruan's team, the people who ditched her, are currently being attacked by a Devilsaur, and one of them dies to it, while the other manages to activate an escape scroll to quit the contest before he is killed. The last one left is Li, and he doesn't have an escape scroll, so he desperately runs for his life until he ends up running into Hao and Ruan. Li begs for help, but Hao doesn't think it's worth helping him, especially since he ditched Ruan earlier. However, Ruan feels bad for Li, so she decides to forgive him on the condition that he promises to never abandon his teammates again. Hao really doesn't think Ruan should be forgiving people so easily, but she has already begun healing Li. Li's health slowly begins to rise again, but just then, the Devilsaur catches up to them. And even though it was originally only after Li, since Ruan just healed him, she has aggroed the Devilsaur as well. Hao grabs Ruan and tells her to run, but since the Devilsaur is after her now, she tells Hao to leave her behind, while she distracts it to buy him enough time to escape. Meanwhile, even though Li is the cause of this whole mess, he has no intention of helping and tries to sneak away to leave the 2 of them to deal with the Devilsaur by themselves. But before he can escape, Hao grabs him by the neck and tells him he's not going anywhere until he apologizes to Ruan properly. Hao then hits the Devilsaur with a massive fire blast, and once he's convinced that it must be dead, he takes Li over to Ruan and forces him to kneel and ask for forgiveness. Li immediately begins begging to be spared because he had no idea that the 2 of them were so strong. He even promises to do whatever they say if they forgive him, and Ruan is still a softie at heart, so she's prepared to forgive him again. But the second she gets distracted, Li takes out a dagger and lunges at her, intending to kill her as revenge for humiliating him. However, before he can do anything, Hao gives him a 3-piece combo that drains the rest of his HP bar. Li is technically still alive, but since his HP has hit 0, according to the game rules, all his points are transferred to Hao, and he is kicked out of the competition. Ruan apologizes to Hao for letting her guard down back there, but he says it's not her fault. She simply trusted Li too much, and that's not something to apologize for. But from now on, he tells her she should only give trust to the people who deserve it. Just then, the Devilsaur returns out of nowhere because it turns out that Hao's earlier attack wasn't enough to finish it off. Hao activates his powers, charging at the monster and slashing it repeatedly until it eventually collapses to the ground. Ruan asks if the Devilsaur is finally taken care of, but Hao informs her that it is actually still alive since Devilsaurs naturally have a high resistance to fire magic. If they want to stop it for good, then they need to either kill it or find a way to release its anger. Hao suggests that they could try taming it by using a soothing spell, and since Ruan is a healer, she immediately offers to cast the spell, but there's one other problem. In order for the spell to work, the Devilsaur's HP needs to be below 20%, and fulfilling that condition is going to be a bit of a problem, because the Devilsaur is already back on its feet. It fires a blast at the two, so Hao instinctively blocks it to protect Ruin, and once she is safe, he charges forward to deal with the Devilsaur. He uses a high-level spell, Infernal Realm, to trap the Devilsaur, and with it stuck in place now, Hao proceeds to stab it with his sword. His first attack does quite a bit of damage to the Devilsaur, but this still isn't enough, so he grabs it by its tail and proceeds to hurl it into one of the infernal walls. Hao is making decent progress in lowering the Devilsaur's health bar, but all of a sudden, it unleashes a terrifying blast that launches him back several feet. He isn't going to be able to keep this up much longer, so he asks Ruin if she's ready to cast the spell yet, and once she gives the signal, he delivers one final hit that sends the Devilsaur's HP into the red. Now that all the conditions have been met, Ruin begins the spell and sends a massive beam of healing magic right at the Devilsaur. After the dust settles, all that's left is an adorable baby dragon, and at first, Hao thinks they might have messed up the spell, but Ruin tells him that there were no mistakes. This is just the Devilsaur's original form, and now that it is soothed, it is no longer a threat to them. Hao is glad that the ordeal is finally over, so he suggests they should just kill the Devilsaur for points now that it's weak and continue with their mission. But as soon as the Devilsaur hears this, it panics and runs to Ruin for help because it really doesn't want to die. Ruin tells Hao to wait because she thinks the baby is cute, and she wouldn't want to see it die. She even says the baby dragon offered to give them something valuable in exchange for letting it go. Hao is surprised that Ruin can understand what the dragon says, but be that as it may, he doesn't really care because he doubts that whatever the dragon gives would be worth up to 1 million. So it's better to just go for the first place prize money instead. The dragon shrinks back in fear as Hao prepares to chop its head off, but at the last second, Hao stops because he doesn't have the heart to kill a defenseless creature for no reason. He tosses the dragon back into the forest and tells it to get lost, but to his surprise, he still receives points for taming the creature. Hao decides to check in with the system to see if he gained any experience there as well, and sure enough, he receives 50,000 experience points for his battle, taking his total experience up to 75,000 points. Hao asks if there are any new skills he can unlock now, so the system shows him 3 basic ones which he can afford. Hao takes a look at them, and of the 3, the one that catches his attention the most is the Eye of Truth skill because it allows him to see hidden details, and a skill like that would be very useful in a shadow forest. The skill costs 70,000 points, so Hao pays and receives a creepy-looking CG eyeball in his mind. Back in the real world, Ruin calls over to Hao to tell him that she just found this special egg over in the bushes, and she thinks this must have been the valuable item that the baby dragon was talking about. Hao takes a look at it with his Eye of Truth, and he confirms that the egg is indeed valuable, because it has a 1 in 100,000 spawn rate, so it's worth taking. Meanwhile, as he and Ruin walk away, they are being watched by Kara on the broadcast, and she is growing more and more interested in Hao with each passing minute. Shortly afterwards, the next phase of the game begins and the points rankings of all participants are displayed for everyone to see. This may seem like a pointless move, but the goal of the rankings is to remind everyone that they can gain points by taking out their fellow participants instead of just fighting monsters. And as it turns out, Hao is in first place right now, so it doesn't take long for his classmates to start trying to target him. However, his classmates still think Hao is only a level 3 weakling, so they grossly overestimate their strength, and it doesn't take long for Hao to take them down. 2 of the goons are already on the ground, and the last one is still in utter disbelief because there should be no way that Hao is this strong, but even after he tries to swing on him again, Hao easily catches the guy's sword like it was nothing. The guy finally realizes how bad the gap in strength is, so he tries to run away, but Hao isn't letting him get away that easily, so he throws a fireball at his back, knocking him to the ground. While he's on the floor, Ruin walks up and grabs the escape scrolls for all 3 attackers, after which she forcefully teleports them out of the forest, effectively disqualifying the 3 and granting Hao their points as the one who defeated them. Hao then uses the Eye of Truth to scan through the forest, and once he locates the Shadow Treant, he tells Ruin to hurry up because he wants to finish the mission as soon as possible. However, Ruin notices that there are 2 people heading this way right now, Zhang and Luo, and she's a little worried that they will cause trouble. But Hao doesn't seem too worried because he can handle anything that's thrown at him. He takes Ruin by the hand and instructs her to run, and they keep running all the way up until they arrive at the Shadow Treant's lair. Ruin asks Hao if he plans to take the boss on right here and now, but instead Hao activates a camouflage ability and jumps into the trees with her to begin the next phase of his plan. Luo and the others had been chasing after him and Ruin all the way here, so Hao plans to trick them into fighting the Shadow Treant unprepared while he sits back and watches the whole thing unfold. A few minutes later, Luo and the others arrive looking for a fight, and they are rather confused because the info panel says Hao should be right here, but they can't see him at all. Just then, the ground begins to shake so violently that Ruin nearly falls out of the tree. Hao holds on to her to keep her from falling down, and once she regains her balance, she asks Hao what's going on. Hao informs her that this is simply a side effect of the Shadow Treant preparing to fight. As the Shadow Treant makes its appearance, everyone begins panicking because they weren't expecting to have to fight the final boss all of a sudden, but as the leader, Luo tells them all to calm down and charges ahead to engage the Treant. He's not strong enough to take the Treant down on his own, so he tells all the mages to use all the fire magic they have since that's the Treant's weakness, and he instructs all the healers to use their heals at max output because he's going to be fighting the Treant up close. Ruon is impressed by how coordinated Luo and his team are because they are actually making decent progress against the Treant, and at this rate, it's only a matter of time before they kill it. However, Hao tells her that the Treant is a level 15 monster, and even if it looks like it's easy to beat, it usually isn't that simple. All of a sudden, as Luo goes to land another strike on the Treant, he notices that his sword did absolutely no damage to it, and a moment later, he realizes that it's because the Treant has just entered his second phase. No one here knows anything about the Treant's second phase, so they have no idea what to expect, and the uncertainty is making them nervous again. Luo is considering retreating, but all of a sudden, the Treant spreads its roots into the ground, and a moment later, several monsters emerge all around them. All the small tree monsters are at level 7, and while they aren't as strong as the Treant, their sheer numbers are still so terrifying that a bunch of the fighters attempt to run away, but they are cut off by even more tree monsters, so they are all stuck here. As Hao and Ruin see this happen, Ruin becomes worried because if things go on like this, then someone might end up dying. Hao agrees with her, and as much as he hates Luo for bullying him, he doesn't have the heart to sit and watch as he is torn apart, so he jumps down and summons his sword, raining fire down on the Treant. As the monsters burn up, Hao lands next to the group and points his sword at them. A few of the fighters realize that this isn't worth it anymore, so they take out their escape scrolls and quit on the spot. Hao gives everyone else one chance to take their escape, scrolls out and quit as well, but Luo and the others are still being stubborn, and they are convinced that they should be able to defeat Hao with ease since he's only level 3, and their average level is 5. It's clear that they still insist on fighting him, and Hao is more than happy to accommodate if they really want to get beaten up so badly, but all of a sudden, several branches from the Treant reach out and grab them. Hao is able to jump out of the way to avoid it, but the other fighters aren't so lucky, so now they are dangling by their feet and shamelessly begging Hao to come save them. Luo is disappointed that his team is so incompetent, so he cuts the vines around his feet and charges back at the Treant to finish this himself. However, he fails to realize that the Treant had already released toxic fog in the area, and inhaling it will cause severe hallucinations, so he warns everyone to be careful. He then activates an anti-toxic banner to protect himself from the fog, but he had already inhaled a bit of the toxins earlier, so he begins hallucinating, getting attacked by his teammates, but in reality, it's just a bunch of tree monsters trying to trick him. He quickly catches onto the illusion and snaps out of it, but he's still going to have to deal with the monsters. Fortunately for him, Hao steps in to take out a bunch of the monsters, and to get rid of the fog, he creates a ring of fire that burns it out of the air. Once the fog clears, Luo sees that while Hao was fighting, Ruin had been treating the members of his team who were affected by the toxins of the fog so they wouldn't die. That said, he warns them that there's no guarantee that she can keep them alive if they stay here any longer, so he urges everyone to quit while they still can. The fighters all agree with Hao, so as soon as they get the opportunity to do so, they all open their escape scrolls and teleport out of there. Once all the others are gone, Hao turns to face the Treant, but it's not going to be an easy battle because the Treant is in its final form. Hao attempts to trap the Treant in a fire prison to burn it to ash, but it anticipates his move and creates a barrier to protect itself from the fire, and it mocks Hao for thinking that such a petty trick would work on it. But a moment later, it gets distracted by Ruon, and Hao uses that opportunity to sneak up behind it and unleash a full-power fire blast. While the Treant is completely engulfed in flames, Hao readies his sword and proceeds to slice it down the middle, killing it in one blow and earning himself a total of 100,000 points. With the dungeon boss dead, the broadcast announces that the mission is finally complete and 3 people manage to survive, so a gateway opens for them to leave. Hao is surprised to hear that there are still 3 people here, because he thought everyone quit earlier. He's not surprised that Ruin chose to stay, but he wonders who the other person is. Just then, Luo yells at Hao from across the forest and demands to know how he got so strong. Hao refuses to give him any information, so Luo gets mad and attacks, but he's obviously no match for Hao, so Hao knocks him back and grabs his escape scroll before forcefully teleporting him out. Now, All that's left is for Hao and Ruan to leave through the portal, but all of a sudden, the dungeon begins to malfunction due to an anomaly, and the broadcast says the portal will be closing in a few seconds. Hao can't let Ruan face whatever unknown danger is about to come, so he picks her up and chucks her through the portal to ensure she's safe. A little while later, Hao manages to get out of the dungeon as well, but when he gets back to the academy, he finds the entire place completely trashed. Just then, he notices two armed men walking this way, and while he's not sure what happened here, he knows it will be bad news if he gets spotted, so he camouflages himself and hides behind a wall. As the guards walk past, he uses the Eye of Truth to figure out who these guys are, and apparently, they work for the Tiger Group, a group that previously worked under the Mo Group, but were kicked out for indiscriminately killing innocent people. They apparently came here because they have a grudge against Kerr, and they have already captured her, along with all of the students who were teleported out of the dungeon earlier. One of the guards even mentions that they captured a really pretty girl a few minutes ago, and hearing that, Hao knows they must be talking about Ruan. Meanwhile, in the main hall, the leader of the Tiger Group has tied up all the students who have been caught, and he seems to have taken a special interest in Ruan. But while he's touching her face, she bites his finger in retaliation, so he smacks the crap out of her as punishment. He then starts beating her up even more. But Luo can't stand the sight of such cruelty, so he charges at the leader and headbutts him off Ruan. Unfortunately, the leader turns out to be level 12, so he's not going to go down so easily, and with Luo's arms still tied, there's no way he stands a chance against him. Luo gets knocked back with a gut punch, and the leader plans to make an example out of him by shooting him in the head for all the others to see, but all of a sudden, the leader's men collapse to the floor, and a moment later, the leader gets stabbed in the shoulder by Hao. He has no idea how Hao managed to get behind him, but the dagger he just used dealt a lot of poison damage, so he can't move around right now. Hao then walks up to Luo with the dagger still in hand, and for a second, everyone thinks Hao might be trying to get revenge for all the times that Luo bullied him before. But fortunately for him, Hao doesn't hold on to such minor grudges, so when he brings his blade down, he just cuts the ropes on Luo's wrists to free him. He then hands Luo the dagger and tells him to finish off the leader because if they don't take him out now, then he's bound to come back 3 seasons later to get revenge or something. Luo recalls hearing that it's possible to level up by killing humans as well, but he has never tried it before, and seeing how hesitant he is, Hao asks him if he's too scared to do it, but Luo doesn't want to look like a wuss, so he agrees to go through with it. The leader mocks Luo because he thinks there's no way a sheltered student like him would have the guts to kill another person, but a second later, Luo stabs the leader in the back, killing him on the spot. After the leader is dead, Luo feels a surge of power in his body as he levels up, and now that he's done, he walks back over to Hao to return the dagger, but Hao tells him he can keep it. Luo is shocked that Hao is willing to give up such a valuable item, and he doesn't understand why he's being so nice to him even though he treated him badly before. Hao asks him whether he wants to keep the dagger or not, and Luo really does want it, so he thanks Hao for the gift and apologizes for all the times he made fun of him. Hao doesn't mind forgiving him, but Ruan refuses to accept it and says Luo doesn't deserve Hao's forgiveness. Luo yells at Ruan and asks how she could be so heartless when he risked his life to save her earlier, but while she is grateful for his help, she says this is an entirely different matter. Hao says he really doesn't mind forgiving Luo, but if they are going to be friends, then he needs to prove his worth. So Hao asks Luo to protect everyone here while he's gone. As for him, he plans to go rescue Kerr since he heard a guard mention that she was being held in the gymnasium. Outside, Hao spots 2 guards sitting by the stairs, so he slices one across the neck in an instant and holds the other at blade point to keep him from fighting back. He then asks the guard where Moker is being held, but before he can force him to answer, all of a sudden, the leader of this unit comes crashing down from the sky, forcing Hao to jump out of the way. The leader then attempts to shoot Hao in the head, but Hao has already gotten back up and runs into the woods for cover. Bin is impressed because he didn't expect a student to be so quick, and he is sure this is going to be an entertaining battle. He orders his men to fire into the forest to flush Hao out, and once Hao no longer has anywhere to hide, he is forced to face Bin head-on. He attacks with everything he's got, but unfortunately, Bin's suit is designed to negate damage, so Hao's strikes have little to no effect on him. To make matters worse, Bin also has high-powered laser cannons built in, meaning a direct blast would be instant death for Hao. Hao manages to block one of the blasts, but he is nearing his limit, so he calls on the system and asks if there is any way for him to survive this, because he cannot handle this as he is now. The system informs him that he has enough experience points to upgrade his link level and unlock a new ability. It asks him if he would like to do so, and Hao obviously answers yes because he has no choice. Just as Hao is about to be bombarded to smithereens, The system activates the defense trait of the Crimson Emperor ability, forming several shields to protect his body. Bin was absolutely certain that a blast like that would obliterate Hao, so he tells his men to loot the gear from Hao's corpse. However, to his surprise, Hao is still alive and well, so Bin orders his men to continue firing at Hao until he drops dead. However, with Hao's increased defense stats, he is able to run right through the laser blasts and decimate all of Bin's men in one go. He then turns his attention towards Bin, and Bin tries to defend himself with his armor, but Hao uses the opportunity to move behind him and activate his new special ability, Defense Explosion. The ability does not deal any direct damage to the target, but instead attacks their defenses from the inside, so moments later, Bin's armor begins melting off his body, and now that his defenses are gone, Hao knocks him out with a single punch. Bin begs Hao to spare his life and even offers to hand over the key to the treasure chest, and this gets Hao curious, so he decides to leave Bin alone for now and goes to take a look at this so-called treasure. As he inserts the key and opens the chest, Hao is amazed to find all sorts of rare items inside, and along with granting him 35,000 XP, it also contains a Medusa's tear, several ancient crystals, a dungeon key, and a Hellscream weapon. These items are all powerful, but Hao has no use for them right now, so he decides to convert most of them into experience points with the system, and after he has done so, he now possesses 130 total experience points. With his new point count, the system informs Hao that he can now unlock a new King of Glory account, which comes with a whole new set of abilities and stats. The account is called Crazy Moss, and it grants him the abilities of a mad scientist who once destroyed his world with his inventions. Hao doesn't like the sound of that since destroying the world seems pretty serious, but the system assures him that no abilities are inherently evil, so it all depends on how he chooses to use them. The system tells him to just give it a try, so Hao decides to go for it and activates the ability. However, nothing really happens, so he thinks it might be a dud. However, a moment later, a small robot named Weiss appears at Hao's feet, and it explains that it is an AI created by Crazy Moss, and Moss's abilities allow him to engineer, decompose, and assemble whatever he wishes, even powerful weapons. Hao asks for a demonstration, but Weiss tells Hao that his level is too low to make any powerful weapons, but he can still give a demonstration on how versatile the ability is. Hao gives Weiss 2 items to work with, and after combining them, Weiss creates a sticky goo trap. And now that Hao knows how the ability works, he dumps all the weapons he has collected on the ground and tells Weiss to create something with them while he's gone. In the meantime, Hao heads out to go rescue Moker, but as he arrives at the location where she's being held, he finds 2 of her bodyguards turned to stone, and on the second level, there's a level 38 mercenary talking to her. Hao knows he stands no chance against a level 38 fighter, so he decides to wait a little so he can think of a proper plan of attack. The mercenary tells Moker to reveal the secret to him before it's too late, because, after all, unless she gives him the Medusa's tear, her loyal bodyguards are going to remain as statues forever. Hao overhears this, and he recalls that the Medusa's tear was in the treasure chest he found earlier, so he takes it out of his inventory and runs over to the petrified bodyguards to free them so they can fight Shio for him. However, even after pouring the tears on the guards, nothing happens, so Hao wonders what's going on. Meanwhile, Shio tells Moker that as long as she agrees to his demands, then he will guarantee that she becomes the next head of the Mo group, and all she needs to do is provide him with a map of the safe zone deployment areas. However, Moker tells him that making her the head of the Mo group isn't enough of a bargaining chip because she could have done that on her own. Meanwhile, Hao is still trying to figure out how to free the bodyguards, but even after dumping the entire bottle of Medusa's tears on them, absolutely nothing changes. And to make matters worse, Moker flatly refuses Shio's demands, so he's losing patience with her, and Hao wishes she could have at least played along with Shio a little to buy him some time. She tells Shio that no matter what he says, he will never be able to persuade her, and because of that, Shio is about to kill her, so Hao is forced to come out of hiding to rescue her. Moker recognizes Hao as the promising candidate she noticed earlier, and she seems pretty smug for someone who was about to die a moment ago, especially since she didn't even know Hao was here. Hao tells Moker to stay back since he can't have her dying in the middle of battle, and those 2 bodyguards are still petrified, so he's going to have to deal with Shio on his own. That said, fighting someone as strong as Shio isn't going to be easy, so Hao tells Moker that she's going to have to pay him for saving her life. She agrees without hesitation and adds that if he can get her out of here without a scratch, then she'll give him an extra 10 million as well, and Hao is happy with that deal, so he prepares for battle. He launches a firestorm blast at Shio, but unfortunately, the blast has no effect on him because Shio walks through it as though nothing happened. He then kicks Hao to the side so he can get to Moker, But just as he is about to take her out, Hao suddenly returns and forces him to fall back. He and Hao then clash blades for a few seconds, but Xiao's power outclasses Hao by a wide margin, and after suffering a single hit from him, Hao ends up losing over 20% of his HP. Seeing how bad the situation is, Moker tells Hao he can still leave before it's too late because this has nothing to do with him, but Hao refuses to give up because he's still got a few tricks up his sleeve. He then throws the sticky trap that Weiss made earlier at Xiao, and at first, Xiao thinks this is nothing more than a useless trick, but then he realizes that his health is slowly being drained by the trap, so he might have underestimated Hao after all. He decides to finish this quickly, so he rips his way out of the trap and launches a powerful slash at Hao. Hao manages to block it, but even with his shield, his HP goes down by a lot as a result, so he can't take much more of this, but he's got a plan in mind. So he just needs to hold out a little longer. He throws another sticky trap at Xiao to buy time, and while he is distracted, Hao takes out the weapon that he asked Weiss to modify for him. As the gun begins firing, Xiao is forced to run around the gym to avoid being hit, but he fails to realize that the gun is firing automatically, so Hao uses the opportunity to sneak behind Xiao and stab him in the back. Xiao is caught off guard by the sudden attack, but he retaliates by stabbing Hao to get him off his back, and at first, it looks like Hao's attack didn't have much of an effect, but the dagger Hao used has an instant death poison effect, and it would have guaranteed victory for him, but Xiao happens to have a legendary protection item on him, and using it allows him to survive. However, he is also extremely pissed right now because that item cost him a lot of money to buy, and he can't believe he wasted it on a nobody like Hao. So he's not going to fall for any more tricks like that again. He begins beating Hao down, and Hao is completely out of tricks to save himself here, so Xiao is about to kill him, but at the last second, Moker's petrified bodyguards finally break free and push Xiao aside to save Hao. They thank him for his help because if he hadn't used the Medusa's tear earlier, they never would have been able to break free on their own, and now that they are back, they proceed to one-shot Xiao. The battle is finally over, so Moker walks up to Hao and thanks him for his help, to which Hao tells her she's welcome. But he's still expecting to receive his reward money in addition to the 10 million bonus she promised earlier. After Hao gets back on his feet, he walks over to Xiao's body and stabs him to make sure he's dead, and after that, Moker asks him if he would like to join her group. Hao turns her down because he's just here for the money, and he doesn't like the idea of becoming someone's underling. Moker assures him that joining her group isn't something he will regret because she takes care of her people very well. She even promises that if Hao agrees to join, he and his entire family will be taken care of in the best part of the city, and that's an offer that's too good for Hao to pass up. A little while later, we see Hao and his family in one of the most luxurious hospital rooms in the city, and while Yunfei is looking around in amazement, Hao's father looks at him with worry because he doesn't know how much Hao must have spent on a place like this. Hao assures him that he doesn't need to worry about the money, and a few moments later, a new doctor comes in to check on Hao's father, and he sincerely apologizes to Hao for how poorly the other doctor treated him earlier, and because this hospital is owned by the Hanmo Group, a VIP like him doesn't have to pay a dime. They then return the black card that Moker had given Hao to pay for his father's treatment, and Hao is really starting to appreciate the perks of having the Mo Group backing him. The doctor then tells his assistants to go get the highest grade antidote for Hao's dad, but while they are doing that, Yunfei can't help but wonder why Moker would give Hao her black card, so she's starting to think he may have gotten a little too close to her during the tournament, but Hao tells her that nothing of that sort happened. Just then, the nurses come running back to inform the doctor that something terrible has happened. They just went to the vault to retrieve the top-tier medicine, but when they got there, all the valuable medicines had been stolen, and there was nothing but a message written on the wall saying Beast God. The doctor assumes this must have been the work of a rival group, and without that top-tier medicine, there is no way they'll be able to treat Hao's father's condition, so Hao asks if there's any other way for him to get the medicine, and the doctor tells him that he might be able to find some at the black market. Hao decides to check it out, so he heads there with Yunfei, and along the way, he explains everything that happened during the tournament, and she is relieved to hear that Hao earned Moker's favor because he saved her life, and not because he became her sugar baby or something. They are getting close to the designated meetup spot that the black market seller they contacted gave them, so they approach with caution, but to their surprise, no one is here. Hao finds that odd since the black market is known for its credibility, but all of a sudden, Yunfei spots a box sitting on the trash cans nearby, and she assumes the medicine must be inside the box. However, when she opens the box, a mysterious gas is released, and shortly afterwards, an explosion goes off, forcing Hao and Yunfei to jump back, and when they land, they walk right into a trap that was laid out beforehand. Hao tries to use the system to break out of here, but the system informs him that the gas is made with a venom that creates a field of absolute silence, and the effect also partially cuts off all communication, which happens to include the system, so it's going to take a few minutes to recover. Just then, a figure begins approaching the two, and it turns out to be Dr. Fan, the first doctor that tried to turn Hao and his family away. Hao had already suspected that he might be behind this because only a doctor from the hospital would have access to such a high-quality potion to sell on the black market, and Fan doesn't deny it. He was the one who stole the hospital's supply because he secretly works for the rival faction, and he's holding a grudge against Hao for getting him fired, so he's going to watch as he is slowly poisoned to death. This would have been the end for Hao and Yunfei, but all of a sudden, a woman shows up and knocks Fan out. Hao has never met her before, so he wonders why she would come to his rescue, but she actually wasn't here to save him. Her name is Siyu, and she just happens to have a grudge against Fan, but since she's here anyway, she helps Hao and Yunfei break out of the traps. Yunfei has already suffered a lot of damage from the poison, so Hao gives her some medicine to recover some HP. After that, he turns to chase down Fan with Siyu, but before he knows it, Fan has circled around and grabbed Yunfei to use her as a hostage. But before he could actually hurt her, a boy named Ansheng comes out of nowhere and drop-kicks Fan in the face. He then catches Yunfei, and she looks absolutely smitten because Ansheng seems so cool. Hao runs up a second later and thanks Ansheng for saving Yunfei. And now that she is no longer in danger, Hao grabs Fan and begins punching him for revenge. Yunfei tells him to stop and reminds him to take the medicine out of Fan's coat so he doesn't accidentally break it, and Hao thanks her for the warning, so he secures the medicine. And after that, he continues beating Fan up. Once Hao is satisfied, he finally stops beating Fan. But just when he thought it was over, everyone suddenly feels an intense pressure weighing down on them. And Siyu recognizes this as the effect of a mind control spell that's preventing them from moving, but she had no idea that Fan had allies who were this powerful. A few moments later, the woman who is responsible for the mind control walks up to retrieve Fan for a retreat, and there's nothing any of them can do to stop her. However, just then, Fan's system comes back online and informs him that he can use 10,000 points to remove the mind control effect that was placed on him. Fan tells the woman to let go of him and sends Ruin back to Hao to try and get the antidote back from him. Hao can't let that happen, so he cancels the mind control effect with the help of his system and prepares to fight. The woman attempts to mind control him again, but it doesn't work on Hao this time, so he leaps into the air and prepares to cut her down. However, the woman was smart enough to know when to cut her losses and skedaddle, so before Hao could strike her, she activated her teleportation cloak, teleporting herself to safety while ditching Fan to fend for himself. As soon as Fan realizes he's on his own, he starts groveling at Hao's feet, begging him to spare his life. However, Hao has no mercy left to give, so there's no way Hao is letting him live after he tried to take the antidote. As a last-ditch attempt, Fan injects himself with a dangerous drug, and as his body begins to mutate, Hao decides that he's not going to wait for the power-up animation and just stabs Fan through the chest to finish him off. A little while later, Hao sends Yunfei back home so she won't be put in any more danger, and now that it's just him and Siyu mentions that she's heading to the Mo Group auction, and she assumes that Hao would like to join her as well. Hao asks how she knew he was planning to go to the auction since only high-ranking members of the Mo Group are allowed to attend, and while he may have Moker's favor, he never told Siyu that. And now that he thinks about it, it was also pretty convenient that Siyu just happened to show up when Hao got into trouble, so she must have been sent by Moker to keep an eye on him. Siyu admits that Hao is right about her being sent to look out for him, and she's not the only one either because Ansheng was also sent to help. However, Ansheng left so soon after the battle was over that Hao didn't really get a chance to thank him. He isn't really upset about being spied on since if it weren't for Siyu, then he and Yunfei would have been in serious trouble. Siyu says there's no need to thank her since she's just doing her job, and anyway, the auction will be starting soon, so they had better get moving. Before long, Hao and Siyu arrive at the auction house, and Hao is amazed because he has never seen anything like this before. Siyu explains that the auction is held in a subspace where all 9 major families bid on valuable treasures. Soon after the auction begins, the host announces that participant number 11 has just bought the level 70 magic crystal for 3 million, and Hao is surprised that there's someone willing to spend that much right after the auction starts. But after getting a closer look at the guy, Hao realizes that he looks an awful lot like Ansheng. And after getting Weiss to confirm it, he finds out that that really is Ansheng down there. This makes no sense to Hao since, with how young Ansheng looks, there's no way he should have the kind of resources necessary to bid in an auction like this. But then again, Ansheng might have someone backing him, so there's no way for Hao to really know. The auction continues, and the next item up is a life-saving potion, which sounds really useful, but Weiss tells Hao that it's not worth it because once he levels up his alchemy skills, he will be able to make potions like that whenever he wants. Hao agrees with Weiss, but just then, he hears the announcer say that number 11 has purchased the potion for 4.5 million. He seems to be buying up everything he can get his hands on, and whatever his reasons may be, it's clear that he's got very deep pockets. Hao, on the other hand, can't really afford to buy much since he only has the money he got from the tournament. Siyu tells Hao that if he agrees to officially join the Mo group like Moker asked, then he would have access to their vast fortune and could buy as much stuff as he wants, but Hao still doesn't want to make a decision like that so soon. The next item on the auction list is a blueprint from the master engineer called the Heart Steel, with a starting bid of 2 million. And everyone in the auction house audibly gasps when they hear this because it's the first time they've ever seen a blueprint like this go for such a cheap price. They begin discussing it, and all of the auction goers assume that the discount must be because the blueprint requires a significant amount of time and effort to manufacture, not to mention that it would require an alchemy master to even attempt to create it, so they don't really think it's worth it after all. Siyu thinks the item is going to fail since there's no way anyone here would be willing to manufacture such a blueprint, and Hao asks her why she thinks that. So she explains that while the blueprint does have potential, it is for a single low-tier enhancement mech, so there's not much benefit to creating it, and furthermore, having a master engineer create an item consumes intelligence points, so no one would want to take the risk on such a mediocre item. However, for Hao that really isn't a problem, since his Moss account has max-level intelligence stats, so he raises his hand and says he'd like to buy it. All the other auction goers mock Hao because they think he just wasted his money buying a useless piece of paper, and Siyu can't understand why he would do something like that when she just told him that it wasn't worth it. But Hao just explains it away by saying he wanted to keep the blueprint as a souvenir even though it's useless. After all, he doesn't want to reveal his capabilities just yet. As soon as Hao has the blueprint in his hand, the system upgrades it into blueprints for a mech that is 20 levels stronger than the original, which means it will be really useful once Hao learns how to build it. After that, the auction continues and it's finally time for the main attraction, a resurrection elixir that is said to be capable of bringing anyone back from the dead. Because the item is so special, the bidding starts at 100 million. But even with the potion's miraculous effects, it's not without its downsides. When the potion is used to bring a person back from the dead, they end up transforming into a raging, bloodthirsty elf. It's hard to say whether the person resurrected can ever be the same as they were before they died, but to those who are grief-stricken, that usually doesn't matter. Hao asks Weiss if the alchemy skills would be able to create a potion like that, but Weiss says no because resurrection is outside the scope of pharmacology. A VIP offers to pay 200 million for the potion, and for a while, it looked like no one else was going to bid on it, but then Anchong spoke up and offered 300 million for it. No one else was able to outbid him, so Anchong ended up winning the potion, and Hao can't help but wonder who Anchong intends to revive with it. After the auction, Hao is walking home when Anchong catches up to him because he wants to talk. Hao congratulates Anchong for winning all his bids, but he wonders if the resurrection potion was really worth it when it has such severe side effects. Anchong personally isn't sure, but resurrection is a powerful tool that can rid you of the fear of death, and he has already spent so much money on it, so he might as well try it. Speaking of things Anchong spent money on, he figured that Hao wouldn't be able to buy many items for himself since he didn't have much money to work with, so he bought him a cloak of flight as a gift. Hao tries to turn him down since this cloak costs 6 million, and he couldn't possibly accept something so expensive, but Anchong tells him to just take it because he thinks Hao's sister is cute, and he walks off before Hao can refuse again. Later on, Hao goes into the system and prepares to try out the mech blueprints he got from the auction. From what Weiss has told him, the mech won't have world-breaking power or anything, but it will at least possess the strength of a level 20 fighter, so it's worth making. Hao summons Moss's workbench, and after inputting the blueprints, the system asks him to select a gender and figure for the mech. Hao chooses to make it a woman, and when it's time to design its body, he decides to model it after his mother, because even though it has been many years since she died, he still misses her dearly, so having an android that looks like her would be nice. Once he's done creating the body, he instructs the system to begin constructing the android, but right in the middle of the construction process, the system throws up a warning message, and in the next moment, an error occurs, causing a lot of smoke to be released. Once the smoke clears, Hao finds a girl in a maid outfit floating in the air, and he assumes it must be the mech he created, but he doesn't understand why it's not in the form of his mother like he intended. Also, it seems like there's something weird about that girl, but she suddenly runs into Hao's arms and starts calling him master. So he decides to just go with it and names her Nana since she's his new subordinate. But little does he know, Nana is actually a mortal from the M79 Nebula who hijacked the mech creation process to resurrect herself, and the second she gets the chance, she plans to take over this world. Later that day, Hao takes Nana to introduce her to his family, and both Yunfei and his dad are pretty accepting of her. So Hao explains that he plans to have Nana handle all the housework from now on. He sets her to work immediately and tells Nana to start washing the dishes, and as much as she doesn't want to be doing this, even though her monster consciousness is free within the body itself is programmed to follow Hao's every command without fail, so she can't disobey him at all. Hao also plans to have Nana act as a guardian to protect his family in case of another emergency like last time, but since she will be doing chores in the meantime, Yunfei dumps all of her dirty laundry for her to wash, and Hao's dad tells her to start making dinner while also cleaning up, so Nana has got a long day of hard work ahead of her. The next day at school, Hao is called up on stage by the principal to recognize his efforts because it is thanks to him that Moker managed to make it out alive during the attack the other day. The other students can't believe Hao is the big hero who saved the day against the Tiger Group's attack, so they start suggesting that Hao is just faking it as a cover for the real hero. But as soon as they say this, Luo gets mad and grabs one of them by the shirt, because how dare they slander Hao's name when no one else stepped up to fight while Hao worked so hard. The principal is equally angry because he can't stand such disrespect. But Hao tells him to let it go for now, because it's only natural that his classmates would be skeptical of his power when all they've ever seen him do until a few days ago was fail. With that said, the principal awards Hao with a huge cash prize for his efforts, and on top of that, he offers Hao a very special item that symbolizes the school as a whole to show how grateful the school is to him. This is a very momentous gesture, but just then, an alert begins blaring as multiple gates are detected within the school building. This shouldn't be possible because the school is supposed to be in a safe zone, but these monsters are very real and very deadly, so several students are taken out in an instant. The teachers yell for the students to evacuate while they still can, so a bunch of them start running towards the exit, but before they could make it out, a giant bull monster suddenly blocks their path, and even when an instructor, one of the strongest fighters here at the moment, attempts to defeat it, he gets bodied by the monster with ease. The monster laughs and says no one is leaving as long as he's here, and he believes there's nothing weak humans like them can do to beat him, so finishing them off one after another should be easy. But just then, he gets stabbed through his stomach by a sword, and a moment later, his body gets blown up by Hao. All the students are left in shock because they had no idea that Hao was really so powerful, but Hao tells them to hurry up and get out of here before another monster blocks the exit. In the meantime, he plans to face the rest of the monsters here, and both Luo and Ruan are going to assist him. They say they will back Hao up from a distance so they won't get in his way. But Hao says there's no need for that because this is the perfect opportunity for them to level up. He then charges towards the chicken monster, and the chicken tries to attack Hao, but Hao is way too fast for it, so he easily slices it all over its body, reducing its HP to a fraction of what it once was. And now that he has been weakened sufficiently, Hao tells Ruan to finish it off. Without a second thought, she raises her staff and prepares a lightning bolt spell that absolutely obliterates the chicken, and since she was the one who dealt the final blow to the monster, she gains a ton of XP, even though Hao did most of the work. Hao plans to continue doing this as they proceed to help raise the levels of Ruan and Luo, so he tells them to be ready to finish the monsters off when he gives them the signal. Both Luo and Ruan are grateful that Hao is helping them get stronger, but they ask him if he's really okay with this since he won't be getting much XP if he lets them have all the final blows. However, Hao says it's not a problem because he doesn't need this kind of XP to get strong, so it's much more important that he helps Luo and Ruan grow. Otherwise, they'll be dead weight to him in the future. They soon make it outside the auditorium, and there are even more monsters out here, so Hao realizes that the situation is much worse than he initially thought it was. Even though the school was in a safe zone, it was still somehow invaded and overrun by monsters, and if this safe zone was compromised, then it stands to reason that all the other safe zones in the city have been compromised as well, and Hao is starting to worry for his family's safety. Just then, Hao and the others are surrounded by a group of monsters, but he really doesn't have time to be dealing with this, so he blocks both of their punches and unleashes a fire blast that burns both monsters so bad that they can barely move. And now that they are both weakened and unable to move, Hao tells Luo and Ruan to finish them off, which they immediately follow through on. Just then, Hao hears the screams of two students nearby, and they are currently being preyed upon by two large demons. And these demons are talking about how fortunate they were to be assigned to this location because there's an endless stream of high-quality fresh bodies to consume here to level up. Hao is shocked to see that the monster's levels are actually 16 now, even though they were 15 when they arrived, and that must mean that if the monsters keep killing humans, then their levels will continue to go up indefinitely, and that would spell disaster. Just then, the monster notices Hao and tries to attack him, and sure, the level 16 monster is stronger and faster than all the level 15 monsters Hao has faced till now, but it's still no match for Hao's incredible strength, so as it tries to sneak up on Hao, he easily dodges and begins slashing at the creature's tongue. After severing the first monster's means of attack, the second one tries to sneak attack Hao, but Hao reacts in time to block it with his sword, and while the monster is pinned down, he has Luo jump in to slice it right down the middle. The first monster is terrified when it sees this, so it tries to run away, but Hao has no intention of letting it escape, so he launches a targeted fire blast at the monster, and once it collapses to the ground, he tells Ruan to go take care of it. Seeing how easily Hao and the others took out the monster, and how much XP both Luo and Ruan gain without having to do much work, the two students who were saved immediately start begging Hao to take them in as well and let them fight alongside him. But Hao isn't in the mood to take on any more subordinates, so he tells them to just hurry up and get down to the underground bunker before more monsters show up. Ruan notices that Hao seems pretty serious right now, so she asks him if something is wrong, and he explains that he just realized that the monsters that have invaded the safe zone will continue to grow stronger and stronger as more time passes, and at this rate, it will only be a matter of time before they grow too strong for them to handle. Hao is sure that his family must still be safe back at home because he left Nana in charge of protecting them, and she's strong enough to handle any threats below level 20, but once monsters start getting stronger than level 20, then there are going to be major problems. For now, the group continues working their way through the monsters in the school, and both Ruan and Luo have managed to level up quite a bit thanks to all the monsters they've finished off, so Hao thinks it's time for them to split up. The two both tell Hao that they still want to fight with him, and they start arguing over who is more useful to him, but Hao gets annoyed and tells them he wasn't asking for their opinion. They both understand and agree to do as Hao says, so Hao uses the Eye of Truth to surveil the area, and he soon finds out that there are 3 students hiding in the cafeteria right now. He tells Luo and Ruan to go rescue those students, and after that, he wants them to head down to the underground bunker for safety until further notice. They understand, but Ruan asks what Hao intends to do in the meantime, and he explains that he wants to go check the teacher's building to see if there's anyone there who needs his help. With everyone clear on the details of the plan now, they all get moving, and as Hao is headed towards the teacher's building, he asks the system to tell him how many contribution points he has left. The system responds and informs Hao that he has 210,000 contribution points, and that amount is enough to either unlock a new King of Glory account or to upgrade one of his existing accounts. The idea of unlocking a new account sounds good, but Hao doesn't have any time to figure out how a new account works, so instead, he decides to upgrade his link level to the Crimson Emperor account, and as he does so, his strength is instantly raised to that of level 31. With this level of strength, Hao is sure that he should be able to defeat any threats that come his way, and at the same time, over in the teacher's building, there are 3 women terrified and doing their best to stay hidden. However, a monster suddenly lands right next to them, and they all scream in terror because they think they are about to be killed, but it turns out that the horse monster is already dead because Hao already got to it. After the horse collapses, the women are all shocked that someone really managed to take the monster down because it was already level 18. Hao tells them that they should hurry along and find their way to the bunker, but the teacher asks him what he's going to do, and Hao explains that he plans to stay and save as many people as he can before leaving. At the same time, there's a girl in the school's collection room, and she used all the chaos from the monster attack as an opportunity to sneak in and steal a bunch of valuable artifacts for herself. But just as she was about to leave, that's when Hao walked into the room. She immediately launches an icicle at him, and Hao prepares himself for a fight, thinking an enemy is here, but then he realizes that it was just Shui. From the looks of things, it's not hard for Hao to realize that while everyone else was running for their lives and trying to escape, Shui used it as an opportunity to sneak into the collection room to look for treasures to take for herself. Hao jokingly asks if she found anything good down here, but Shuai responds with hostility and tells him it's none of his business. Hao honestly doesn't care that she came here to steal because it doesn't affect him, but he is offended by how rude she is acting, especially since she just attacked him unprovoked. Since her initial strike against Hao didn't work, Shui prepares to launch a giant icicle at him, but just then, the ceiling begins to shake and crack, and moments later, a large monster comes crashing down right on top of Shui. It came down here because it could smell the scent of human meat, and it is happy that it found such an appetizing-looking meal, but before it could grab Shuhei to devour her. Hao blocks its hand with his sword and grabs Shuhei before taking her to safety. Shuhei doesn't understand why Hao would bother helping her when she attacked him a few seconds ago, but he says he came here to rescue any survivors he found, and as annoying as Shuei's bad attitude was, he's not going to let her die because of something as minor as that. Even so, Shuei suggests that Hao should leave as soon as possible because that monster looks like it's already over level 40, but Hao is confident that it can't be that hard to handle. However, the monster then throws a punch at Hao, and the second he blocks it, he can tell that this ape's strength is far greater than anything he has seen so far, and there's no way he can beat it on his own. So if he and Shuei are going to make it out of this mess alive, then they are going to have to work together to take this monster down. The monster mocks them and says that even if they combined all of their strength, they would still be no match for him, and it then proceeds to attack Hao by throwing several crates at him. But Hao slices through them one after another. He tells Shuei to focus on sniping the monster from a distance since her specialty is ranged attacks, and in the meantime, Hao will handle the close-range fighting. He manages to slash the monster across the back, dealing some fire damage, but it turns out that the attack wasn't very effective because the monster's defenses are really high. Hao is having a hard time keeping up with the monster's constant barrage of attacks, but fortunately, he's not in this alone because Shuei is here to run interference. She begins launching ice attacks as a distraction to get the monster's attention and create an opening for Hao to attack, and after several minutes of this, the two of them are eventually able to whittle the monster down to half health, and after a few more coordinated strikes, they are pretty close to killing it, but Shuei is starting to think this was a little too easy. Just then, the demon gets back up and admits that it underestimated the two of them, but it refuses to go down alone, so it begins the process to self-destruct. Hao doesn't understand what's going on, so Shuei explains that high-level monsters are able to blow themselves up by converting the remainder of their HP into destructive energy, and the resulting blast is extremely powerful, so Shuei thinks they should get out of here before they get caught in it, but Hao knows the ape is just trying to use this as bait to get them to leave so it can escape, so he rushes in before the self-destruct sequence is complete, and with a little help from Shuei, he is able to slice the monster's body clean in half, killing it once and for all. Hao feels incredibly relieved now that the monster has finally been taken care of, and Shuei is very grateful to him because if he hadn't saved her, then she would be dead by now. Hao tells her it's not a big deal since he couldn't have defeated the monster without her assistance in the first place, so they can just call it even. That said, he tells her she should probably get to the bunker soon since the levels of the monsters will only keep rising from here, and there's no telling how strong the next one will be. But Shuei tells him there's no need to worry about her because she already has her own way out of this place, so she thanks him for everything he did and takes a few steps back. Hao has no idea what she is talking about, but a moment later, Shuei disappears in a bright flash of light, and Hao is left dumbfounded because he didn't even know that kind of thing was possible. He is then snapped out of his daze by the sound of the system informing him that he has gained new items, so he looks to his left and finds Weiss meticulously picking up all the valuable treasures he can find. Weiss is excited because all these treasures can be used to craft some amazing items, and Hao is aware of that, but he doesn't think it's right for them to take these things since they belong to the school. However, Weiss reminds him that the entire collection room has been smashed up, so if they just leave these things here, they are bound to be destroyed by monsters or looted by someone else, and when he puts it that way, Hao sees no reason why they shouldn't just take the stuff now, so he bends down to help Weiss gather treasures.